And somebody said, "Oh, Paul was giving a couples talk, or talk to the married couple." And this. She said, "What are you going to say to them? You don't know." Okay, that's fair enough in a certain respect. Though, and I'm not trying to defend any of it. So first off, anything that I say or any priest says, it's not going to be gospel truth. And I can only just give you from my experience. But at the same time, though I don't have that lived experience with a spouse, I spend an awful lot of time speaking to couples. And I think there is something to be said for coming in as a somewhat objective observer. I fear that if I were married, I were speaking to a couple, I might be seen as, "Oh, you're just another husband." You know, that I don't have a pony in the race, and I'm not saying I'm completely objective just because I'm a subject who's trying to understand something, but I think that the celibacy and the life that the priest has does help to give him a certain distance to view things from the outside without it being colored by his own wounds or hurts from his marriage and so on. Not that, and again, as I said, it's not that we can't be wrong on things, but also we get, needless to say, we have a lot of experience speaking with couples because marriage is hard. Good marriages are hard. I'm not cynical about marriage at all, but there's a marriage exhortation that can be read at the traditional weddings, that is in the traditional form of the liturgy, and it's very beautiful. And in it, in the exhortation, Holy Mother Church says to the couple, what you're about to enter into is very difficult, but with love it's possible, and with great love it's a joy. And we certainly see this in terms of when St. Paul speaks of marriage, right? That the husband is to be to the wife as Christ was to the church. And of course, many in our times look at those passages because he also says, "Women be subject to your husbands," and husbands love your wives, which that's also very interesting in terms of. He says numerous times, often it's translated fear, but it's more respect. That the man needs to feel respected and the wife needs to feel loved. There's a lot of wisdom in that, but unfortunately, some people misread those passages as if, "Oh, the man's just can be a tyrant." Well, he's the one who's supposed to be as Christ was to the church. The crown that he wears needs to be a crown of thorns, and of course, the wife is as the church, and the church also goes through her sufferings for Christ. So there is difficulty there, but with love, it's possible, and with great love, it's even a joy, and that's really also my life as well. That the priest is to be a victim with Christ, and that's real. But it should never be an unhappy or a morose or depressed life. But okay, to have that honor to suffer with Christ and to suffer for the beloved, for the one we love. And I think that's one thing that's so important. There are lots of things that can be said, but just I was thinking about it. I remember once a seminarian said to me, he was just about to be ordained, and he was a little bit nervous. He was kind of a shy guy, and he says, "I don't know, I'm not sure I have the charm and just the ability to, entertain," or whatever, however he put it. He said, that's not what you need. Not that it can't help. I mean, we all have our gifts, and some people are better. But the standard must be charity. It always must be charity. And I think we lose that sometimes in marriage a little bit, in terms of, and when I say charity, what I mean, and following St. Thomas Aquinas, is that charity is seeking the good of the other for their sake. They were always seeking the good of the other. If we have that in mind, that's what love is. And I think that sometimes, as the saying goes, it doesn't have to be quite so negative, but familiarity breeds contempt. That after we live with somebody for a long time, we can kind of lose sight of this, and there's a history of pain, and that's part of just any real relationship. But what must be the default? The default always has to be charity. You know, when we're making our decisions, when we're responding to things, right? Am I seeking the good of the other? Going to sleep already? I don't blame you. When we lose our way, just as similarly, and as a priest, when I'm dealing with people, and maybe things are getting a little bit tense, or there's a situation in the parish, or I need to think, okay, what am I doing here? If you haven't noticed, you probably didn't notice with me, of course, because I'm quite humble and quite an angel.
Look at his head. It's like,
I know. It glows. It certainly glows.
I thought it was a halo.
I thought it was a
where are you going to pillow for that heat?
But sure, my pride gets hurt, or I have my own ideas about how things should be. And, you know, this isn't that difficult, folks. There are two ways to do things. My way and the wrong way. So just come on. Get on board. All right? But especially when things get difficult, I need to ask myself, well, whose good am I seeking? And, well, what is this about? Even with the priesthood. I didn't become a priest to seek my own good. Hopefully. Now, do I seek my own good often? Sure. There's plenty of times when I blow it. But I just say that in terms of, I think there's a lot of components that are so important in marriage. But again, when we start to lose our way, right, that just going back to that idea of charity, and, right, well, what is it that I'm about? What is this about? Because I think this is also an element that gets lost a little bit, that especially once kids start coming, that I often hear parents speaking and worrying about the salvation of their children, but I don't very much hear spouses, in a sense, worrying about how they're doing in helping the spouse to get to heaven. Right? That Adam was given Eve as a helpmate precisely because he needs help, and vice versa. Right? And help to make it to our final goal. Certainly help in many other ways as well, especially as guys. But that idea that actually you have a real responsibility to each other. You're to be working together. You've been given to each other for sanctifying each other. Right? And you are to be an image of Christ in the church. Right? And there should be a working together, right, for the good of the other. And again, I understand certainly with the children and many other things that just come into the life that it makes it quite difficult. But just in terms of grounding yourselves, and especially in your relationships with each other, you know, how am I helping my spouse to get to heaven? Well, by being his cross, of course. You're saved by the cross, and you know, I'm gonna.
Yes.
Thank you. And so it's just if we can have, as I said, as a priest, I have to do this quite often and pull myself back. And when we say the devil is lost in the details, but what are those foundational things that I need to keep in mind? When Aristotle speaks of marriage, sorry, I've got to go nerdy to Aristotle, but it's so beautiful the way that he speaks of marriage. He speaks of it in terms of, it comes up in the politics and in the ethics, in his work on ethics and important politics. And he does not say that it's a monarchy in a marriage, and certainly not tyranny. He says it's an aristocracy. And the point being that, so first off, he makes a distinction between a good regime and a corrupt regime. In a good regime, so he says monarchy is a good regime, and aristocracy is a good regime, and republic is a good regime, and it's divided by whether the number of rulers. In a monarchy, the king, one is ruling over many. In an aristocracy, the few virtuous are ruling over many. In a republic, you've got many who are participating in the rule. And then on the other side, when it's corrupted, you have a tyranny, an oligarchy, and what he calls democracy. That's just a free-for-all, which we're quickly moving towards in our country. But the difference between them is that the monarch and right, so the way that he speaks about it is necessarily good. He rules for the sake of his people. The tyrant is one ruling for his own sake. Right? The oligarchs rule for their sake. It's the rich few who are simply seeking their good. In the aristocracy, they use their gifts for the good of those they're ruling. And then in the republic, you have a much larger group that's participating in that government, but also still seeking the good of the whole, as opposed to in democracy, as he understands it, and really, as we're moving towards, it's every individual for themselves. Right? But he says a marriage is an aristocracy, and he says that, and I said, with an oligarchy, it's the rule of the rich; aristocracy, it's the rule of the virtuous. And he says that the wife has her set of virtues, and the husband has his set of virtues. And it's not that the wife is necessarily missing something the husband has, but certainly they're different creatures. Hopefully that shouldn't be too much of a surprise to you. And that they support each other in the virtues that the other has. And it's not just moral virtues, in the gifts that the other has. So I often think of it in terms of Bishop Sheen tells the story. I don't think he made it originated with him, but that hell, both in heaven and in hell, there's a banquet. And at that banquet, everyone has big forks or spoons strapped to their hands, and they're very, very long forks and spoons. And such that they can't eat off their plates in front of them. And in heaven, they feed each other. And in hell, they use those forks and spoons to keep food away from the other and to torment the other. Right? And, okay, what are we doing with the gifts that we have? And also, what are we doing to help the other flourish in their gifts? That was a part of the talk that I gave to both the men and the women. Right? In terms of Aristotle, virtue is a question of flourishing. Right? And the flourishing of the wife is not going to be the flourishing of the husband. Right? And rejoicing in those gifts that the other has, and looking to the goods of those gifts. Right? And I remember, this is just an example of when it doesn't work, but Jordan Peterson makes a very interesting point that he speaks of a man who marries a very, very beautiful woman. As he says, that man is punching above his weight. Basically, he's married a woman who's out of his league. And great, wonderful, good for him. But if he's a very insecure man, he's going to try to downplay and even diminish the wife's beauty and gifts, right, when she dresses up, instead of rejoicing in the beauty that she has because of his own insecurities. Oh, who are you dressing up for? Right? He doesn't want her to flourish. He doesn't want her to blossom and be that beautiful creature that she was made to be, for fear that he's going to lose her. Right? But he's really only thinking of himself. And as Peterson says, yeah, after a while, the wife stops dressing up, and he gets the wife he deserves. Right? But it's a pretty harsh example, but to my mind, it underscores some of that. Okay, are we really trying to help the other to flourish in the virtues generically, but most importantly also just in terms of who they are and what they need? Right? Or am I seeking myself, and in seeking myself, I'm just kind of driving over the other? Right? And certainly this is a full-time job. This is a full-time thing because we all do it. I live in a community with 85 guys, and just community life, as St. John Birchman says, community life is the cross. And St. Blessed Don Columba Marmion said, you could have a monastery full of men ready to be canonized, and they still get on each other's nerves. Yep, and it's difficult. And Augustine speaks of it in terms of, it's like rocks that start at the top of the mountain stream, and they've got all these rough edges, and they bang together as they're going down the stream, and by the time they get to the bottom, those edges are smoothed off. That's what hopefully happens, but it takes a lot of knocking together, and it's not always so fun. In fact, it's often quite painful. But of course, that knocking together can also just put on edges as well. and make us sharper and more harsh with each other. So I think it's these are just some things to keep in mind, and also in terms of that difficult work, which is day in and day out, right? And very often it's not in big things, so to speak. But like in the seminary, it's a strange place. Maybe you know it in marriage. I don't know if it's quite like this in marriage, but we live together, we play together, we pray together, and you know, it's like Hotel California. You can leave any time you want. You can never check out. What is it?
Yeah. I think the big difference is in the seminary, if somebody does something really bad, you just kick them out. You know, because you're like, well, that's not acceptable with your community. You got to get out of here. Whereas in a marriage, these things can happen, and then you have to decide, is this person capable of being better? Do they want to be better? You know, and can I live with them?
Yeah,
depending on whatever it is that's happened. But I think that's a big key difference.
Oh, I mean, that's the difference between the seminary and priesthood. Because the decisions that the least fun thing about being at the seminary is making decisions about the men and their vocations where we get ordained. Because once they're ordained, it's an ugly baby, but it's ours.
That's good.
And at that point, then absolutely, it's not only our responsibility in terms of the faults or failings of that priest, and as in marriage, the faults or failings of that priest will also have effects on the faithful that he comes into contact with, and on our community, and on other priests, because he will have to, dare I say, and this isn't, we're human, we do have some priests who seem not to be able to live with other priests. Yeah, I mean, especially in the early days, we needed more numbers, then it was hard, and I'm not better than any of them, etc. But this is just reality, and this is why that discernment process our discerning is so important. It's not foolproof. I mean, we have had guys go through who there was no red flags. There were no red flags in the seminary, and then a few years into ordination, just things start coming apart. Other guys who really struggled, and they do quite well as priests, and really it's not over till it's over. I mean, I don't, better men than I have left the priesthood, that's for sure. But you're right, there is a difference. Although what I was saying, sometimes those guys who just really blow it, really just aren't clear on the concept, they're the easier guys. That it's more difficult in terms of just the day in and day out. The guy who just doesn't seem to do what he should be doing, but he's not quite doing enough wrong that we can kick him out. And it's all those little things, but those little things day in and day out, that can make life beautiful and wonderful, or can make life quite difficult. And that's what I mean in terms of, I'm not just saying large things in terms of seeking the good of the other, but so it's a good thing I didn't get married. I'm a bit OCD, and so it's not. As I told my mom one day, and this was a few years ago, when I was living at home, Mom, it's not that difficult. It's a left sock and a right sock. Can you please just put them together? Look at this, 2 left socks again. You know how when you had the sports socks and it kind of goes like that? Like that's, look and see and come on. Yeah. I need medication. Okay, but all right, maybe picking up your underwear off the floor here and there, or thinking, boy, this really does kind of drive her crazy. I mean, and the point being that certainly there are big things that come up, but very often it's not that it just appears out of the blue. And I was saying that last night with the ladies in terms of the sacrifices that we need to build into our lives to in order to habituate ourselves to do difficult things. That if we only do difficult things when we absolutely have to, we're not even going to be able to do it when we have to. Whereas if we have things that, okay, many little things, acts of self-denial, acts of generosity, and so on, that's all forming us so that when a larger one is asked of us, we will be able to do it, right? The husband who, or wife, or both, who are thinking of their spouse in their decisions, in their actions, and so on. And again, as an aristocracy, they're working together and understanding that each has different roles to play and different gifts and so on to bring to the table. And instead of using those gifts as your gifts to be overbearing or a bit of a tyrant, using your gifts actually to help the other to flourish, which may mean not using some of your gifts in the sense of, yeah, maybe I need to tone mine down so she can have hers. I mean, there's always a lot of compromise that needs to take place because we have to be careful. I think Peterson talks about this, and others do as well, where like in fights and so on, congratulations, you just won the argument. You showed her she was wrong. Good. And the damage that you did to her emotionally because of the way you did it and how you were, you had to win that fight, you've just put yourself way, way back in your relationship. And so, speaking a bit extravagantly, that's all we can do in some respects in this forum. But again, if we're thinking about charity in terms of, okay, what is for the good of the other? What is it that I can do to help them to flourish, to help them to be this particular creature that God has created them to be? Because that's also going to be the best thing for you. Mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. If you've got a happy wife at home or a happy husband, it can help a lot. And I think part of that also, and this is very difficult for all of us, quoting Jordan Peterson a lot, but I think he's got a lot of good things to say that align with the faith, that one of his rules for avoiding chaos in life is, I think it's one of his rules, is always tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And he makes that distinction because, yeah, okay, we're not always seeing the truth particularly clearly, but at least don't lie. But try to always tell the truth. That's really hard to do in a relationship. It's really hard to see ourselves clearly, and especially when we're hurt, especially when we're angry. Right? We think, no, I'm right. This is just no. Right? And very often we really need to take a step back. I think was it the men's group that I told the story from Franklin Covey's book? Mm-hmm. I didn't tell it to the ladies, but he's got a nice story along these lines of our perspective. It said that there was a lady she was in the airport and she had a layover and she got a cup of coffee and she got one of those packages of cookies, that has the tray with the cookies, and she had her book and she got her cookies and went and sat down and was drinking her coffee, and she opened up her cookies and set them on the table, and there's somebody right next to her, kind of on the other side, how the table's really close. And she reached over and grabbed a cookie, and he reached over and grabbed a cookie also. And he was reading his paper or whatever. Oh, weird. So she just continued, and then she took another cookie, and he took another cookie. This jerk. Eating my cookies. I keep going, and then down to one last cookie. And he reaches over and he breaks the cookie in half and takes half of it and puts it in his mouth. Total a-hole. I'm not sure what that means. I don't know what that means, but so, and after he ate that half of the cookie and left her that half, the other half, he folded up his paper and picked up his stuff and went to his flight. And she ate that half of the cookie, and she's steaming at this point. And she closes her book and puts it in her purse, and when she opens her purse, she realizes the cookies she bought are in her purse.
Oh my gosh!
Such a nice guy.
This guy she thought was such an a-hole. Sorry.
Oh my gosh! funny.
Yeah, so
You just split the cookie, you know. So.
yeah, I mean that is particularly kind, and so trying to, and we just needed to take a step back and really trying to be honest with who we are, and also being honest in terms of trying to understand where the other is. You know, sometimes we just think the person's being a jerk, and this is in life too, and this is in the seminary as well. You know, this guy's just doing this because they're absolutely inconsiderate. And actually, this happens all the time in the seminary, being OCD and all that. But we do live in a different culture now. You can take nothing for granted in terms of how the guys have been raised. I'm not talking necessarily particular moral evils, but we do have to teach them how to eat properly, how to use a fork and knife. They do use them, kind of, but maybe don't stab with your food like this. Or, and just we have to put notes on the board sometimes. Mama is not here. If you spill milk on the counter, Mama will not be here to clean it up. Now, when I see it, my tendency is, wait. I mean, these lovely, lovely children. Lovely children. My child, let me teach you how to pray. But I have to think, no, I don't think they're necessarily intending to be inconsiderate, but they may not have come from a home where you make a mess, you clean it up, you take it out, you put it back. You move it, you return everything to its place. And if it wasn't in its place originally, when you got there, put it back in its place anyway. And that's part of the training, the formation and so on. But my point in that is that it could be easy to just think they're just being jerks, when probably they're not being jerks. And okay, they do need to be informed and helped with these things, because they might just think I'm being an OCD freak who, gets so uptight about milk spilled all over the countertop. Who am I?
Crying over spilled milk.
Crying over spilled milk, yeah. But trying to be as honest as we can be, and particularly also in terms of communication. You hear that everywhere, and I do spend a fair bit of time at least watching videos about couples and married life and men and women and so on. And yeah, you hear communication, but it's so important. Your wires are going to get crossed. And if you can't communicate, it's going to be so hard to uncross those wires. And it's so hard to uncross those wires even when you can communicate. But if you can't speak to each other, or what I find sometimes when I do have to meet with couples who are really having difficulties, Rhone was saying, I think you said it, Rhone, that kind of come in and be a referee. I feel more often that I come in, I'm a translator, right? She says one thing, and he hears another thing. And in a sense, understandably so, because, well, he connects that to some hurt from the past, et cetera, and she's just saying that because X, Y, and Z, and then likewise going pursuing trying to translate what she's trying to communicate to him without all the baggage that comes when she communicates, if that makes sense. Right? So it's difficult, but we really need to strive to do it, just as I do as well in the relationships that I have. And a big part of that, of course, is also if we're not receiving that communication, if we're just ignoring or disdaining the others. I see this as well sometimes in terms of some marriages that don't seem to be very healthy. When there is a disdain for the other, or mutual disdain, right? And they speak to each other that way, right? I mean, we all have our moments, so don't get me wrong there, and we all can say things that we shouldn't say, but also we need to take responsibility and apologize. We need to man up, or woman up, no offense, right? And okay, when we cool down a bit and say, I'm sorry, that's part of the truth, sorry, I blew it. But when there's just kind of a cycle of disrespect, of ignoring, of kind of just poo-pooing things, it doesn't go away. Usually there's a whole lot of, in some of these relationships, there's a whole lot of dirt under the rug, because it was just easier to be swept under the rug, or
one or both felt that's all they could do because they couldn't deal with it mutually. And it's difficult because, when we do deal with it mutually, we might have to deal with some ugly things, and some hurt spots are definitely going to be pushed on. But being truthful, being honest, and even fighting, I think it does make me concerned if I see a couple that doesn't fight. I'm not sure how much they're being resolved. We do fight. Now, how we fight, and that's what I mean by the disdain, the silent treatment, or some of the things that I see, let alone much more grave things. That's kind of another story. But trying to be honest and open as much as we can, both in giving and receiving, and understanding that it's just difficult. It's difficult for all of us. It's difficult for me and our Lord. It's difficult in the spiritual life. Fortunately, our Lord doesn't show me all of the mess that I am. The Curé of Ars, St. John Vianney, once asked God for the grace to see himself, to see John Vianney as he is. And God granted him that grace, and he said, it almost threw him into despair. Yeah, okay. It's not that we have to deal with everything at once, but there will be parts that need to be cleaned, wounds that need to be delved into, and in a sense, with a country song, if you're going through hell, keep on going. The way out is through, and but it's very hard to do by ourselves. It's very hard. You are given to each other to help in that journey through, and there does need to be just old-fashioned virtues. There needs to be patience. There needs to be charity above all, right? And which is again seeking the good of the other. So I think that's probably more than enough. I didn't have a talk prepared. I just
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
And
it's a good bit to chew on.
As Catholics, as people of faith, and we need to keep our eyes on our Lord. I just got done nailing him to the cross. He's hanging there. I'm the one who nailed him there. And he finds an excuse for me. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I think that's a mistranslation. I think it's Father, forgive Father Lillard, because he knows not what he And certainly that was his prayer relative to me. Right? Well, is that how we view each other? Is that how we treat the other? Are we generous or do we just immediately jump to think? Now, we may have reason. I'm not saying be naive. Okay, if there's a history, certainly. Then, seeking the good is trying to help them in a reasonable and realistic way to grow. And then also having the humility, and by the way, humility is truth. Right? The humility to realize that we have a lot of work to do. We have areas that are wounded, that are hurt, that need healing, and places where we're just not doing what we should be doing. It's I've been quoting this a lot. I read it on Pinterest, so it's got to be. Some bishop who said, God cannot. He cannot reach he can reach the sinner that you are, but he cannot reach the saint that you think you are. Right? So we need to come to terms with, okay, sure. I didn't get ordained because I'm perfect, and you don't get married because you're perfect. And or, by the way, this might be a little harder for some to swallow. No offense to those who are you don't get married because the other is perfect. You may think they're perfect, but it's Screwtape says in the Screwtape letters that once they get married, then the real work of learning to love the actual person that they married comes into play. Right? And that's hard. As I quoted this time, I'm sure, but the saying goes in French, I don't know in French, but that no man is a saint to his valet. The valet who takes care of him takes care of his clothes and sees his dirty laundry and so on. Yeah, hopefully, perhaps it's better sooner than later in marriage. You see that real cool guy who was head lead singer of the big hair band and so cool in college.
that hair's fallen out. Not so cool anymore.
It's like this.
And well, yeah, it was really great. And this has happened many times. Sorry, more with women than with men, but they come to me and they're hair loss. Yes, it's where they tell me that their husband is selfish and this and that and the other thing, and I ask them, well, how was he when you were dating? Yeah, he was pretty much the same way, but he was really cool back then. We were in college, and he was the quarterback for the team, and this, that, and the other thing. And okay, I know. Please understand, I'm not cynical about marriage, and I do like to make fun of all of these things. There's nothing that I find funnier than the
I could listen to you make fun of this.
so I hope it never comes across as cynical. It's hard work, and I think it's magnificent, beautiful. And if it's not, then there's a problem, because this is what St. Paul says is the example or the image of Christ in the church. And well, again, Christ had to go through his passion. The church, the mystical body of Christ, has to also go through its passion. And but to get to that glorious Sunday morning, and hopefully also there are beautiful things along the way. And usually it's found in the midst of those sufferings, right? Bearing them together and so on. And there will be sufferings, and there's just and it's a messy deal for all of us, and especially when you bring two wills together, two different wills together, and then a man and a woman together. Oh, forget about it. But it's so beautiful, and sorry, maybe I'll just finish with this because I think it's so good. Just the importance of play and humor. Chesterton says that G.K. Chesterton says that the insane man, he's lost everything except his reason. Right? That we do need an ability to laugh at ourselves, which also is just truth. There's a lot to laugh at when a man looks at himself, and to laugh at each other good-heartedly. Right? That there should be play in the midst of this relationship. I think it's so important. We all need that. In many respects, man is a playing creature. Right? It's a very important part of our health. I mean, that's even clinically, that's been proven, that and play forms us. And learning how to play together, right, is so very important. And if we can see it, I think if we can see it, like even the spiritual life, it's an adventure. And in adventures there are dragons, but there are also princesses, and there are bad guys, but there are also treasures. But we have to persevere in this adventure, and it's going to take us places that we weren't expecting and wouldn't go of our own accord. But in order to reach the end of this adventure, we will have to go through it. So being able to laugh, I think a good sense of humor, and having a healthy enough relationship, which means really, again, looking to the good of the other, making sure that what we're saying is not hurting the other. And as Lewis points out in the Screwtape Letters, that at one point Screwtape talks about his patient. Does everybody know Screwtape Letters, the premise on it? Right, that work on the little annoyances between your patient, who he lives with his mother, the man that he's trying to damn, and the mother, and get those irritating places, those wounds, where they just rub against each other just the right way, that he simply comes home and says, "What time is dinner?" And he does it in just that tone and just that way, that it's nothing short of a blow to the face. But he is able to say, "All I did was ask, what time is dinner?" And he's perfectly innocent in his own mind that he did nothing at all. And then she gets mad and says something, and and as the Screwtape says, and it is not only quite effective, it's quite fun. After each other. And then there too, again, being honest. I was being passive aggressive. At least honest with yourself, and you'd stop that. Or, sure, I know that comment, though on paper it doesn't look like anything at all, and I could say it to anybody else, but when I say it to my wife or to my husband, it's a real jab in the underbelly, under the ribs. But at the same time, if we can laugh a little bit and even laugh at these foibles, I think that goes a long way. There's a Carmelite convent near us, a traditional Carmelite convent, and somebody asked the mother. So I think they've since started 4 or 5 new foundations. They've got more Carmelites than any in the world. It's a strange Carmel. They're actually doing what St. John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila said we should do, and somehow it's exploding with vocations. But the mother, who's been a Carmelite for 65 years or so, somebody asked her what she looks for in a Carmelite vocation, and she said that she eats well, sleeps well, and can laugh. And those are signs that the girl will make it, that she can live the life. I think that's probably even pretty good advice in married life. So I'll just leave it at that, and just the cross is in this life, but it's by the cross that we get to heaven. And really, the more we embrace the cross and learn to love the cross, right, the more joy we should be able to find in it. And how wonderful it is that you can have a partner, hopefully a partner who can help you in those hard times. My partner must be our Lord, but when I try to hug him, it's like senior prom, I just have to hug him myself.
Oh,
Thank you! I think on that note.
I like you were saying a little bit earlier, it made me think of a quote, we judge ourselves by our intentions, but we judge other people by their actions.
That's a good point, yeah.
And I think that's a really big one in marriage, is like, we feel a certain way, or we judge ourselves or how we're behaving by what we think and what we intend in our mind, and we judge our spouse by how they're acting. But how we're acting is probably not what we're thinking.
We're all looking through colored lenses and trying to be honest about the color of our lens. And it's not easy, but at least trying to track that way. Okay, where am I coming from in this? Right? Okay, I'm hurting. So I hope I'm not going to get in trouble with the men, but and I hope I'm not going to embarrass women. But I told them, I said, yeah, you need to pay attention to what's going on in your body. Things are going well, and then suddenly the whole world is melting down, and everybody's turned into a jerk all around you, and so on. And like, gee, what's going on with my hormones? Not that you can just turn it off, but you at least can know, okay, there's a storm right now. I know I need to just hold on, batten down the hatches, don't put up the sails, don't make any decisions, and know that it's probably not as bad as I think it is right now. And us men, we have our time of the month too, kind of, maybe. We haven't had enough sleep, or I don't know what, but right. But okay, we need to check in and see. All right, well, where's this coming from? Where am I at? What's coloring my lens? But yeah, I think that's right. And there's a lot of components there.
Thank you, Father.
Wow, very good.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I think you're all crazy.
We're not all crazy, but all the crazy people are here.
That's why I came, so I wouldn't stand out so much.
It's not too late for me. I can still join the seminary.
Well, there's a nice part, and I forget the book of Chesterton, one of his fictional books, and a young man asks a girl to marry him, and she's like, "Oh, I'm just not sure if it's prudent right now." He's like, "Prudent? When has it ever been prudent to get married?" No, again, it's not the same because it's also the same for the priesthood. Right? You have all these, so sometimes guys will get ordained and they'll get back to those of us who are doing the forming of these guys, and sometimes there'll be a kind of complaint, which I don't mind, but why didn't you tell me about X, Y, or Z? And I think that though there are many things that we can improve, we do a fairly good job. They do get a good formation. But, there are some things you just will not know until you're in the water swimming. There's nothing you can do. You can play priest all day long. You can be Mr. Seminarian all day long. But until you are actually a priest and living the life, there's no preparation. You just can't compare it. Both for good and for ill. There are things that before my ordination I thought, boy, that's really going to be hard. I don't know. And it's not so bad. Other things that I thought, boy, that's going to be great, and it's not so great. And then just hitting crosses I never expected, and hitting joys that I never expected. And the journey continues. So also it's just, I don't know. I mean, and I hear parents say this sometimes too, but just the longer I am a priest, the more I think, I'm just doing it wrong. Often I just think, well, I guess part of being a priest is just thinking sometimes you're just going crazy. It's real. Things are real. And that's okay. Well, sometimes I just go to bed. And I'm thankful that I can go to bed. And I'll start again in the morning. Mm-hmm. Or hitting that restart button and backing up and apologizing, or U-turns are a major part of my life. Well, that wasn't so smart. Well, that didn't work. And I really blew it on that one. And, okay, let me back up. Let me try to come out of this a little bit more knowledgeable, a little bit wiser. Aristotle says that the young can't be prudent because they need experience to be prudent. But we also have to understand that just because you have experience doesn't mean that you're going to be prudent. You have to learn from the experiences. But yeah, learning to live together, learning to love one another, learning with all the vicissitudes of family life and the crosses that come, both with the children and with one another, because we also do change a bit, and, whether it's physical changes or emotional changes and so on. Sure, it's quite the adventure, and I think we can see it that way, but in the best kind of adventure. And we know that our Lord is with us, and none of this adventure falls outside of His providence. We really do need to trust Him in Him. And sorry, I didn't say this. I kind of took it for granted, but families need to pray together. Father Patrick Payton, the Rosary priest, said, the families that pray together stay together. And I can't recommend highly enough the Rosary, the family Rosary. If you can only do a decade, do a decade. Start there and try to get in the habit of building that up. But making your home and your life a service for Christ. Because, by the way, the two holiest creatures that ever lived, minus the human nature of our Lord, weren't monks. They weren't priests. They weren't nuns. It was Our Lady and St. Joseph. How much does that tell us about marriage and the sanctity that you can achieve and are to achieve together? And it's really magnificent, but certainly not easy. Anyway, sorry, so I was done, but
Keep going.
Because somebody
It's so good.
yeah. I just want another song from Chad.
Huh?
Another sleep.
Song?
Yeah, pretty much when I'm depressed, I just turn on the sad songs of Celine Dion. Wrap myself around a bottle of beer with the blinds closed.
But I think, isn't that kind of all decisions in life? It's like, all things being appropriate. If you're going to do something, you need to do it. Like, if you're going to get married, if you're going to have children, just like the other day I was in this class, I was looking at going to postgraduate school. And I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking about going next year. And she said, why? Have you decided that you're going to do this? And I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm going to do it. And she said, then why are you waiting another year? Like, what's the point? And like I said, all things being appropriate, it's like, why aren't you getting married? Why aren't you having children? Why aren't you going to school? Why aren't you promoting yourself or like doing positive things to move ahead in life, right? To take that next step. Because if you have decided that you're going to do it and you don't do it, then there's not really any point in that. You're just procrastinating because you're scared.
I don't think if you wait till you're, same. I'm sorry, I just repeat the same things, but I'm old, so I can do that. But sometimes the perfect is the enemy of good. Also, if you wait until that perfect time, it's just not going to come.
Yeah.
Especially all of you who have kids, so thank you. Right? But also in the priesthood as well. At some point you have to make a decision, and it's going to be scary, and you're not necessarily going to have all your ducks in a row, at least not the way you would like. I'm not saying being prudent, not at all, but it's quite a messy adventure, and all right, that's part of working through things. The lessons that we gain from that reality, from actually our imperfections, is God wishes to use. St. Paul says, "Our glory is saved only by infirmity." We're not only in need of Christ as our personal Savior, but we're also in need of Him as the Savior of our families, the Savior of our relationships, the Savior of my priesthood, the work that I'm doing.
Well, the worst decision you can make is not making.
Right. Yeah. That's the challenge. You constantly delivering. Mother Angelica said, I won't get it quite as well as she says it, but she said, I'm not so much afraid of making a mistake as I am of getting to my judgment and God showing me all that I could have done if only I had the faith to move forward. If only I would have trusted Him enough to do something. Yeah, if we do something, we probably will make mistakes. In fact, we may very well do it badly until we learn more. I'm not saying jumping off Rhone a rock, but it's like certain kids.
That's why I couched my terms in all things appropriate.
All things appropriate.
And if you're pushing forward in a positive way.
Yeah. Not to mention your wife's going to kill you.
Anybody have a question?
Fair tips.
How do you keep on focusing on trying to do the good for the other? If it feels like a one-way street and you're the only one who's doing the good, or you perceive that you're the only one doing the good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's hard. I mean, in part, and please understand, we're speaking generally, so it's always difficult in particular. This is where prudence comes in. So this is what prudence is. Prudence is a virtue that enables us to take, a universal principle and apply it in the concrete circumstances. Right? So, the fundamental principle of ethics. We need the fundamental principles of sciences and so on, but often they don't get us too far. But the first principle of ethics is do good and avoid evil. That's a good principle. But what does that look like here and now in this given situation at this given time and so on? But I just say that as a caveat in case I say something that seems so totally goofy, that it's hard to say in the particular, but I think one thing in terms of, as you say, that focus, this why I think it is good to keep our focus on the Lord, and because, to be quite frank, if He showed me my track record, all the good that He is doing for me, and what I'm focused on, why does my picture keep coming up and what I'm focused on? So I think that can, right, as St. Paul says, and St. John, that He loved us even when we were sinners. His love wasn't dependent upon what we were doing, but was the result of who He is, and He is love. So, and that's also this idea of charity, that we're seeking the good of the other for their sake. It's not quid pro quo, we're not doing it because they have done something for us. That's a different kind of relationship. So when, I have to go for the environment that I know. When Aristotle speaks about friendship, he speaks of friendship of utility, friendship of pleasure, and this highest form of friendship, which when St. Thomas comes along, he uses that definition of the highest form of friendship before charity. And we need all three kinds of friendship. We need friendships of utility. Yeah. I consider, you know, my mechanic or my dentist or whatever, a friend of a sort, insofar as one fixes my car, one fixes my teeth. And I give him a big fat check. And that's fine. There's nothing ignoble about that. But that's what a quid pro quo is Latin for, you know, something for something. Right? Well, and if I don't give him the money, he doesn't fix my teeth or fix my car. And if he does a bad job or I find somebody who's cheaper or whatever, I switch and it's not a problem, right? And dude, I thought we really had something going. You don't use a mechanic? That really hurts. He fixes it. I don't pay as much, and he does a better job. That's the nature of this friendship. And similarly with friendship of pleasure, where there's a certain delight that we get in the friend, but the friendship tends to end once we lose that delight. And this often, as Aristotle says, among the young with romantic relationships and so on. If you know Romeo and Juliet, the play actually opens with him in love with Rosalind, and hardly eating and so on, because in love with Rosalind. Then somebody comes across Juliet, he's like, "Boom!" And they said, he goes to see the priest about marrying Juliet. And the priest thought that it was Rosalind. He said, "Rosalind? That old goose? Oh, forget about her!" Okay. And the friar says, "I see that love is not in a man's heart, but in his eyes." That, okay, it was the delight of beauty and so on. But in this highest form of friendship, right, the friend is seeking the good of the other for their sake. Period. Now, it does need to be mutual, and it needs to be known if there's going to be that form of friendship, for sure. And that's where the rub comes in. That is that when it is only a one-way street, it's very, very difficult. And that's where our Lord can be very helpful in fortifying when we see how he has sacrificed himself. But there certainly are elements of, sorry to use modern jargon, there's nothing wrong with it, but we don't want to enable people in their selfishness and their bad behavior. That we need to do our best to, and this running of that communication, working together, and being honest in terms of, well, how much are each of you giving in the relationship? And hopefully there can be a conversation about that and realize it's never going to be 50-50. That's just not, it's just not reality in life. Now, it might, there are lots of areas, right? So, as I say, if one is more gifted in one area than another, sure. I mean, when it's not going to be 50-50 when the child's nursing. I'd like to help, honey, but no, just not equipped. Right? And that's
depends on the wokeness.
Yeah, even not even sure that the bottle's empty.
Absolutely.
Baby just getting hair in its mouth.
I was thinking the same thing. Oh, you got a few hairs. There's some protein, maybe? No.
One of our priests, he's a pretty hairy dude. And when he first got ordained, he made the mistake of asking another priest of ours who's crazy, lovable but crazy, to be his assistant priest at his mass, or maybe his deacon. Then generally with the bigger ceremonies, you have these ceremonial kisses where you just kiss the priest's hand before you hand things. And the first thing that the priest says, the assistant priest says, he got back to the sacristy. It's a very solemn moment. The priest first solemn mass, everything. And the priest is deaf, by the way. The old guy. He's got the cochlear implants. Yeah. Every time I was kissing hands, it was like I was flossing my teeth. Okay, congratulations on your first mass. Very solemn, holy occasion. Yes,
he meant well.
And he began well. Probably didn't even do that. But so there's always that supernatural element, and we do want to, I think, err on the side of generosity, but at the same time, certainly sometimes we need to sit down, and because it is hard for. it to be sustainable in any kind of healthy, functional way if only one person is working at it. That's for sure. I mean, they're to be helpmates to each other. And then especially once resentment starts growing. And I was telling somebody about this the other day, and hopefully I'm not, well, it doesn't matter. Just, you can take it as you will, or you can call my superiors and say, I said all kinds of, 6 couples in Hawaii. It's not really have to talk. Okay, well, instead of my Hawaii vacations.
We've been putting up with each other for so many years, and he just showed us the truth.
And we all say amen.
It's actually a couple that I'm very close with and I've known for many, many years, and they have a beautiful family, traditional Catholic family, and I get a call from the husband one day, and they're really in a bad place in their marriage. And I was really surprised. I've spent plenty of time with them, and so they're a couple hours from the seminary, so I said, okay, I'll come down over the weekend and spend the weekend with you all. And this is not blaming them. They're both really good people. They're good Catholics and so on. And this is something also in Tradiland that we have problems sometimes. Well, she kind of understood herself to, she's got to be submissive and just, she's very outgoing and sanguine, she likes to be with people and so on. He's the exact opposite. And he never wanted to go to any parties and do things and so on. And she always just compromised. She was always the one who made the sacrifice. And she did this in so many different ways, saying this is what a good wife does. And, well, he didn't see a problem with that. I mean, none of us are going to necessarily, if the other is always sacrificing for us, yeah, why am I going to complain? It's kind of a sweet deal, and she seems to be happy. I mean, she looks like she's happy. Well, one day she just broke. She couldn't take it any longer. And I understand that, and I'm not blaming either of them, but she thought that she had to just constantly be bearing more and more and more, and giving and giving and giving, and that this was what it is to be a Catholic wife and so on. And he didn't realize that his wife was becoming more and more miserable in this. He's not an unkind person, he's not an inconsiderate person. He has a certain seriousness, and the temperaments are quite different. And he didn't realize what was happening. And well, most of you are really too young to even know who she is. I didn't read the book, and I couldn't listen to her. She's so certain and so harsh. But Dr. Laura, I think, wrote a book called "Rearing a Husband" or "Raising
Proper Care and Feeding of a Husband."
Proper Care and Feeding of a Husband. And yeah, absolutely. You can raise a spoiled husband, or a spoiled wife for that matter. And in a certain respect, she had raised a spoiled husband. She had always done what he wanted, and he never realized that was, not that it was always a torture for her, and no doubt there is a certain joy in sacrificing, or should be, especially when there's love, but if it's only in one direction, it can just build more and more resentment, and boy, when that breaks, right, kind of there at the point where she said, okay, I'm staying for the kids, but don't touch me again. And he was just, this came out of the blue for him. He didn't, there was a little thing that kind of triggered it, but that wasn't what it was really about. It was about these years and a kind of misunderstanding. And yeah, we don't want to let, it's really hard to put out a forest fire. But these smaller things, we want to really try to be in places where we can communicate these things. Not when we're steaming mad, and maybe not when your hormones are going crazy, or when there's a particularly stressed reality in your life. There's a time and place, and that's where criticism comes in as well, but we really do need to address these things, because again, once resentment starts building up, boy, it can be such a poison in the relationship, and also just if the other maybe he doesn't know. I'm not talking about anybody here. I'm just speaking in general. It may be that the other doesn't even realize what they're doing.
Not on the same page yet.
Not on the same page yet.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
last night I was talking about habituation in terms of virtue. Well, if they haven't been habituated to think of others, and it might sound like I'm trashing my dad, my God rest his soul, but my parents were divorced when I was very young, and he wasn't around for most of my life, and he was married 4 times, and when he was dying of cancer, I spent a lot of time with him, taking care of him, all this, and at that point I saw he was really trying, but it was just incredible how short-sighted he was, and how self-centered he was. But I saw that he didn't recognize that at all. He was really actually trying to be giving, because he was trying to establish relationships with his kids towards the end of his life. And he just couldn't see at times how short-sighted he was in things. And I recognize he was doing the best he could, but for whatever reason, he didn't have that. He wasn't, so to speak, trained, and there's a kind of training to think of others and be considerate or have your eyes open to certain things. And so it's going to take time, and you're not going to, obviously, none of us are going to go from being kind of selfish and short-sighted to being Mother Teresa. And so just having reasonable expectations as you work together that, okay, this guy's never done this before, or, I mean, it's probably better to put it on in terms of the skill, whatever, but, and it is a kind of skill, we can easily do it that way. But, yeah, and maybe you've been doing it all your life, not just the other person's been doing it all their life, and you just can't figure out why you can't get this. It's just because you're an a-hole.
I am an asshole.
I'm not talking about you. I'm not trying to. Well, we all are. Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, right? We all are at some points. That's why I think about money. Sometimes and we need to come back and admit it and take responsibility. Yeah, sorry.
The brief shining moments of non-assholishness make up for a lot of the rest.
Well, I mean, I think that is that when they can't see the effort that's being made, that goes a long way sometimes. Even though, like with my father, I hope it didn't come across that I was trashing him, but I saw that he was trying to make effort. But I knew it was going to be really hard for him. And okay, and on the other side, my mother raised us, and I think sacrificed way too much for us. That's why I'm so spoiled and bratty. But she was the mother who did everything. All the sports and everything. They're the kind of those parents who don't volunteer or do anything, and those ones who just sacrifice. So, and for my mother, everything was the kids. And okay, I was also coming from that point of view, but recognizing, well, yeah, my mom's a different person. She had an upbringing, and she made different choices in her life, to be sure. But my dad was trying in the end. I think in some respects he was trying at other times, but he couldn't. It was so hard for him to see. Trying to be understanding of where the other person is and honest enough. Well, what are reasonable expectations for somebody who's never given like this, or who's never done this thing that I'm asking of them? And also, I do think positive encouragement, especially with this guy, so I'm going to beat us up by just going from my own experience. I think I've shown it to people before. What can pop a man's ego? Anybody know?
What?
Anything.
Virtually anything.
Everything.
Yeah, in the generic oration for the comment of a virgin martyr, it says, "Oh God, you who have miraculously enabled the weaker sex to undergo this." And, okay, this is one prayer of the church. I know it's in the liturgy, but I just don't agree. No way. I mean, if we had had babies, the generation that there would be one generation of human beings, and that's it. I'm out.
Yeah.
And that's especially if, and that is not being told the whole dynamics of what happens when you're good. Oh, I'm out. You know, but also just.
This does not help me have a good
Yeah.
life.
What am I getting out of this? What's in it for me?
But I think, you know, being aware of that as well. Yeah, and I've seen this over and over again where the wives are, they're expressing maybe legitimate criticisms or complaints, and they're just expressing the frustration with certain things. And how does the man very often take it? I'm not man enough. Right? There's problems with money. I'm not man enough. I'm not making the money for the family that I should be making. You know, if you know, it's a very good book. It's Protestant, but it's very good. He wrote Wild at Heart and John Eldridge. He's a Protestant writer. It's one for fatherhood, but it's kind of based off of Wild at Heart. I'll have to look it up. But he speaks to this as well, that what is the question that all men are asking themselves, and we see it just in modern parlance. And that's, you know, do I have what it takes? And what do we say when we talk to men? Are you man enough? Right? We want to know that we're man enough. Right? And the women can really break a man, right? Breaking him down, making him feel that he's not man enough. And on the other side, and ladies, you can tell me if this is wrong, but a woman wants to know that she's worthy of being fought for, that a man will fight for her. And will somebody fight for me? Will somebody protect me? Will somebody take care of me? And okay, we need to think about these things. There are two, so his books are good. Fathered by God, I think it's the other one, by John Eldridge. Wild at Heart, and I think Fathered by God. Very, very good. And there's also, I use it for marriage prep. I don't do a lot of marriage prep in the seminary because none of those seminaries can speak with a girl. Or no white girl in the right mind to speak with them. But when I have done marriage prep, Jeff and Shanti Feldheim, they're a married couple. They're Protestants as well. Unfortunately, the Protestants do a lot more good work, I think, than some of our Catholics in these fields. But they come from a kind of scientific surveying background where you do these big polls of people and so on. And they wrote two books. One is called For Men Only, and the other is called For Women Only. And the one called For Men Only is for men, and it's about women, how a woman works, how she thinks, how she's processing things. And the one called For Women Only is about men. I think both are very good. They're also very funny, and they try to do it as scientifically as they can. So it's not just their own anecdotes, but the anecdotes they speak to these big groups of men and women and so on, and they get remarkably consistent answers in terms of how things are processed and so on. And I think it's really helpful. Really, really helpful. I know this is a bit radical, but men and women are different. Yeah, I know. It's, I know, I'm pretty obsessive that way. I spend time reading these things because, well.
So did you read both?
I did read both.
And for women?
Oh yeah. Well,
because you have to know. I'm going to read the For Women.
I have to know. Oh yeah. And
definitely going to read that one.
I think the only thing that I found that I would probably disagree with a little bit is the one about women. So she does spend a fair amount of time saying that the women are usually coming from a much more emotional place, which is fair, and that's not said pejoratively, not at all. But I think she overemphasizes a little too much the role of emotions in terms of that an emotional decision is equal to a rational decision. That, okay, if you simply act on your emotions, that means to be respected. Well, not exactly. That, with the fall,
things were kind of turned upside down, and what was lower now is able to rebel against what's higher. And, you know, the head is on top for a reason, and it's not that we're to be unemotional, not at all. Right? In fact, that's not to be human. And like I said last night, we tend to have a much more rich emotional life, and being virtuous is not becoming a man, but it's the proper regulation of our emotions. Our emotions certainly, they're such powerful engines, it's so important because they can really move us to the good when the emotions are harnessed for the good. When we're moved by our passions, emotions for the good, we're practically unstoppable. But it can also go the other way. But just there's a few ways she expresses things as if, you know, if she's just responding emotionally, that needs to be seen as that's equal to a rational argument. But you know, nobody wants to marry a syllogism or a spreadsheet. That's not also part of being human. Yeah, the emotions are, and yeah, the head and the heart need to be at play. But there is a certain hierarchy there. And the emotions, as we all know, the passions can easily get out of hand and don't always listen very well to more important things and things that we know to be true and so on. So that's the only thing that I would say I'd be careful with, but it's not even being careful, it's just kind of keeping in mind that, I brought this up at one of the women's talks when St. Teresa Benedict Prosser, Edelstein, her second name is Edelstein, she was one of the greatest minds in the 20th century. She was a Jewish convert who became a Carmelite nun and was killed in Auschwitz. She, both because she was a woman and because she was Jewish, she couldn't teach in universities in Germany. But she did go around giving a lot of lectures, and she gave many to women. And there's a book called Just Woman, and it's a compilation of lectures. And she's very insightful. I like it very much, not only because she's so incredibly bright, you know, and has such clear understanding, but also because she's coming from a woman's perspective. But as she says, you know, women are much more invested in the personal. Right? I think I gave the examples. It always makes me laugh. And babies, you know, the husband comes home and says, "Mrs. Kafafowitz had a baby," and you know, the woman wants to know, how does it weigh, what do they name it, the boys, the girls, and this. She had a baby. You know, we tend to often be more kind of facts-based and focused and kind of compartmentalized and so on. And that personal aspect is so wonderful in women. And it's not that it's all on one side, and I'm mad enough to admit that I tend more towards that side. I mean, my love is literature, and persons are always much more important to me and much more interesting to me than just building something. Well, these hands don't. That would require work, so I don't do that. But I'm understanding that these elements, and she's one of the things that she says for women. She says that scientific studies are really good for women because because women tend to be much more personal and view everything through a kind of personalized lens, which necessarily is emotional. That when they have to do something like, say, Euclidean geometry, you know, when you're doing the Pythagorean theorem, it doesn't matter whether the triangle's pink or blue or yellow or big or small or cute or whatever. Right? There's an objective reality in front of you that you have to approach objectively without any kind of personal considerations. And it helps women to form that aspect of thinking very objectively. Now, and men may have to go the other way. I mean, this is one reason why I think Jane Austen is so important for men, or literature is so important for men. And yeah, many men do need to, I'm sorry, get in touch with their hearts and at least try to be more aware of their emotions and also aware of others' emotions, where others are coming from emotionally. So, and I'm speaking very, painting broad strokes to be sure, but at least trying to understand some of these realities. Because it is just hard. We are such different creatures. And as I say, we need to be able to laugh because we are such different creatures. I think that's right. I told to the lady, says, Father Bizig, our rector, he's from Switzerland and got a new car. And of course, we're asking him all about it, et cetera, what you get. And then he called his sister and he told her that he got a new car. And I asked the lady, every group I've told, numerous ladies groups this, and I've asked the ladies, what did she ask about the car? And they always get it. What color did you get? And when all the kids, so us priests we sit at a table, it's all men, all the priests. We have a priest table. And all of our mouths just drop like. And we all ask all kinds of things about the car. Not one of us asked what color do you get? How big is the engine? What I mean,
Features,
color? I'm not even sure he knew what color he got.
I think on the book.
Yeah. And that's not a criticism on either side, not at all. And I'm so happy, how colorless the world might be if it was just run by men. And that's not completely fair. I like to trash this because I'm one of that species. I know about my own. But these realities and trying to understand each other. I think there is good literature out there. There are interesting things. Some of it you might have to take with a grain of salt, and that's fine. As St. Augustine says, you must be like the Jews. The Jews left Egypt, and they left the darkness of Egypt behind and took the gold out of Egypt. Right? Okay, you look for what's good there, what is usable, what's in line with our faith, of course, and you take that good, like these 3 works that I just mentioned, are by Protestants, but I think they're very helpful. And you wouldn't necessarily give it to everybody if somebody's not well enough informed in their faith that they couldn't distinguish between what's right and what's wrong in terms of some of these issues. You might want to give them something a little more along the lines of first just the catechism. And that too I think is important. Just often marriage practice not so good these days. And, just a good traditional catechism in terms of what marriage is supposed to be. Anyway, was there a question there somewhere? I just started talking again.
You know what the question was.
What I took from that is that I'm going to read Jane Austen.
If that's all you get from here, it's a success.
The last talk was I'm going to look for all the people I meet in life, what virtues they extol, or what virtues they're good at.
Yeah.
And so from this one, read Jane Austen.
It's not going to get much better than that.
Cultural curriculum.
Everybody else, devotion to the Eucharist, devotion to Our Lady, love of Jane Austen. 3 signs.
I would love my aunt. She has every room is themed, and the bathroom is the Jane Austen bathroom.
Oh, wow!
I don't know if that's good or bad, because many somebody might say, yeah, that's exactly fitting. Yeah, that's right.
What color was it?
Well played. What's the sensitive guy?
Hey, he has many layers.
Touch with your feminine side.
Tonight.
What color was the Jane Austen?
He probably already read Jane Austen 3 times.
Just 3?
My aunt would love you.
Oh.
You can help her become Catholic. Jane Austen, St. Trish.
I'm not keeping any of you. You'll go anytime you want.
Go home to the kids?
Yeah, some quiet here.
I feel like I'm the only one doing the right thing.
Yeah, that makes 2 of us.
It's gonna be a nice ride home, huh?
How far away is it?
Help me!
Can the radio go louder?
That is funny, the Jane Austen connection because I was talking to Callum earlier today about reading the Bible. Yeah.
The Bible and Jane Austen.
Well, my aunt was saying about her son, not baptized, not grown Catholic, Christian anyway. He texted me the other day after I came back from the funeral and everything. He said, "What would you say if I said I started reading the Bible?" And I was like, "You've never touched that in your life. Sometimes you come to mass with us and you sit there in the back and you play with toy race cars." But because he said he started reading Paradise Lost by Milton, and so yeah, he asked me what my favorite, or what books to read out of the Bible.
You might recommend everything follow Mike Schmidt's.
I have, yes. I was thinking, because he started with John Milton's life, and he wanted to read the King James version, because the beautiful language.
You do that with
Yeah, but I was thinking that the best thing for him would be to find some of the most beautiful psalms and books out of the Bible and start with that, and then maybe go into, because I feel like if I